So I'm going to introduce our next speaker here. Please be patient with me while I try to get this name. Correct me if I'm wrong. Gloria Angelia Negrit Lopez. Did I say it correct? She, her pronouns. Did I say the name correct? I hope I did.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. And I also want to add that there will be questions and answers for this, so feel free to send your questions in as you think of them. Go ahead, Gloria.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Gloria Negrete Lopez. I am a doctoral candidate in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Arizona. And so I have prepared some written comments because I will go on and I really want to make sure that I address everything. So hello everyone, good afternoon. Hola y buenas tardes a todos. Thank you so much to all the organizers and everyone working behind the scenes to cultivate this much needed abolitionist virtual space in the Sonoran Desert. I also wanted to say thank you to the previous presenters who shared their knowledge, wisdom with all of us to remind us that abolition is not a new concept and that Black, Indigenous, queer, trans people have been at the forefront of this conversation. I want to remind those in the academic community that our commitment to abolition is more than just citing a few important authors, but that this is a lifelong commitment that calls on us to dismantle the ivory tower and all its classist gatekeeping.
Hi, Gloria. Can you slow down just a little bit? I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
No worries.
Thank you. We need to remember that schools and prisons were designed to resemble one another. We must also remember that universities have ties to private prisons and detention centers. We must work to eliminate police from our campus and cut all ties with law enforcement. Before I get started, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Tongva and Ahashiman people, otherwise known as Anaheim, California. Anaheim is my hometown and where my family lives. I start from this place called home because I find it necessary to begin from the place that taught me my earliest abolitionist teachings. Even though my family did not label it that way, it wasn't until years earlier that I realized that the lessons of survival taught here would help me to dismantle the inner cop mentality I carried with me, and that I think we all carry within us, but that we must continue to dismantle how we police each other and ourselves. I start here because I find it necessary to recognize that many of us grew up with abolitionist teachings due to the violence we have witnessed in our communities. My presentation today is titled Abolish ICE, Abolish Prisons, Abolish the Police, Abolish the Nation State, Building Solidarity while Dismantling State Violence. The analysis that I offer today was made possible by the writing and work of groups such as Critical Resistance, Defend the Criminalized Collective, otherwise known as Study Organizer, and the Keep Olive Free Deportation Defense Campaign. And of course, the writings of Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Marta Escobar, Sylvia Rivera, and Marsha P. Johnson, brought to us by the archival work of Tourmaline and Dean Spade. I was asked by the organizers to talk about solidarity building between movements that call for the abolition of ICE, defunding the police, and abolishing the prison industrial complex. And I'm going to share my screen very briefly so I'm going to start off with this image, and I'm going to give folks, a couple seconds to view it, and then I'm going to take it off screen so that we can allow the ASL interpreter to come back on. I begin this talk with the image of the bodysuit created by the abolitionist collective Defend the Criminalized, also known as Study Organizer. The screen print is the inspiration behind the title of my presentation, but it is also a call to action that seeks to make connections between the call for abolishing ICE and the ongoing call to abolish prisons, the police, binaries, landlords, and the nation state. I start with this image to mark the importance of culture and art making within organizing. We need art makers and creatives to take up this call, to provide us a glimpse into an abolitionist future. We need art that is already abolitionist, that is already free, that is already liberated, and that can show us our abolitionist future. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the importance of art making too much, but this is something that is central to my dissertation project. Abolition is not just a new concept, it has a long trajectory of activist history rooted in Black freedom struggles. Scholars in the field of critical prison studies acknowledge the importance of beginning any conversation around the term by addressing its historical groundings in a Black radical genealogy that challenged the institutionalized captivity of enslavement and the dehumanization of Black bodies. To talk about this term means to engage in work that is inherently attuned to anti-Black racism, colonialism, criminalization, and dehumanization at the hands of the nation state. Scholars, activists, and community organizers have worked extensively to broaden the definition of prison abolition, and furthermore have helped expand the conversation of abolition. As we see today, their labor was not in vain, and our teaching this weekend is an extension of the hard work of abolitionists before us. In 2002, Critical Resistance, in their publication, the CR Abolitionist Organizing Toolkit, stated that immigration policies are based on force, punishment, and racism. People without citizenship face everyday surveillance, harassment by police, end quote. These quotes reinforce the need for immigration to function as a key organizing strategy within abolition. Even as far back as the early 1990s, CR and others have been warning us that the fastest growing component of the PIC is immigrant detention. It is the 1996 Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act that made more people deportable and gave even fewer people a chance towards legalization. In the CR anthology titled Abolition Now, Marta Escobar reminds us that the statements such as, quote, immigrants are not criminals and immigrants are hard workers, as well as no one is illegal, attempt to distance immigrants from criminality are violent acts of exclusion that are rooted in anti-Blackness and serve to move migrants closer to whiteness. When building solidarity, we must think critically about the language that we utilize and to not fall trap to this ascendancy to whiteness. In the anthology Beyond Walls and Cages, Prisons, Borders, and the Global Crisis, the editor of the book in the introduction discuss how abolition is not just relegated to discussion of the prison industrial complex. Instead, abolition serves to connect prisons with border militarization and anti-colonial struggles. This book utilizes abolition as an analytic practice that serves to unite various struggles, such as border militarization, abolishing prisons, and anti-colonial work that might seem separate and in opposition to each other. For example, yesterday we heard from Jamil Nasser about the connections between the paramilitary forces of Israel and occupied Palestine that welcome and train US police forces and border enforcement. We know that these violent terrorist organizations are in conversation with each other.
Sorry, Gloria, could you slow down just a little bit? Sorry.
Yes. With each other, which makes it all the more necessary for us as organizers to build a broad scope of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Creating connections with border militarization and policing demonstrates how the use of quote, national citizenship creates not only a distinction of those that are citizens and non-citizens, but it frames relations of power where one group has institutionalized legitimacy and others can be violently removed from the nation state by the institutions of policing and security. The freedom of movement is an explicit abolitionist approach, and we must call for an end to coercive mobility and examine the forces that lead someone to forcefully migrate. This critique serves to move away from some of the mainstream narratives that serve to reinforce the innocence of one group, i.e., non-citizen, undocumented, and as I explained previously, this narrow view serves to give one group power and legitimacy over the other, which is racialized and a gendered performance. By bringing these various struggles in conversation, the authors demonstrate that prison abolition and border politics are intimately tied together and are part of a larger conversation that centers an anti-colonial futurity. In Dylan Rodriguez's article, Abolition as Praxis of Human Being, a foreword, he similarly advocates for a broader definition of the term abolition that moves beyond dismantling prisons and instead invites the reader to conceptualize it as a theory that is a performative action of abolition. In other words, quote, constituted by so many acts, long and overlapping. Again, an artful description of the presumed futurity. And I really want to make sure that we sort of remember that point, right? Constituted by many acts that are long and overlapping, right? Abolition is this long and overlapping act. Looking forward while also looking back at history. For example, Rodriguez reminds us that Indigenous, Black, and non-Black people of color, feminists, and queer have long been doing this abolitionist praxis that has remained unfinished. We must collectively work towards that project and know that this project is never ending. Escobar, in her book, Captivity Beyond Prisons, looks closely at the various state apparatuses that criminalize, police, and detain Latina immigrant women, queer people, and gender nonconforming folks. This framework deployed by the author serves to reinforce the importance of looking beyond the sexualized and gendered narratives that label immigrants okay, sorry, hold on. Okay, is that better for the audio or?
Yes, I think that's better.
Okay. Should I move closer or make sure that, is that better?
It seems like that's better. I don't know if your microphone volume can turn higher, but if not, I think we just keep going.
Okay.
Sorry, Gloria, I think it's glitching for some reason. I can't hear you.
Oh my God, hello?
I can hear you. I don't know if your video is catching up. I don't think it is.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, maybe if you want to turn off your video and just do audio, that might help. I don't know if but I don't know if it helps with the ASL interpreters though. Is that okay? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, let me. Is that better now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'll just do audio then, if that's. Are folks still able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. So stuff in Mata Escobar, I believe. So this framework deployed by the author serves to reinforce the importance of looking beyond sexualized and gendered narratives that label immigrants as. Escobar writes, immigrant women's presence disrupts the ideal since their bodies represent reproduction and settlement. The depiction of Latina immigrants as mothers function within white supremacist imaginary and hierarchy. The analysis demonstrates how the Latina immigrants and Latina immigrant motherhood poses a threat to the nation state that must be eradicated by any means. This in turn makes the Latina immigrant figure irrecuperable and unable to be saved by the nation state, which justifies the paranoia and hyper awareness that leads to their policing. It should come as no surprise and despicable treatment of children of order is part of that violent narrative of irrecuperability. Young children are still being detained, tortured psychologically, and put through a horrible process that attempts to kill them, disappear under the guise of population control. And I would also add that youth of color and working class youth can have continuously been placed in juvenile detention and continue to be. The US has always caged children. This analysis is only part of the knowledge that we need to familiarize ourselves with. It is also important that we continue to challenge the narratives of migration. We must look to our local organizers to remind us of the local work that we must commit ourselves to. We must continue to fight against immigrant detention. We must dismantle Operation Streamline. We must dismantle the relationship between local police and ICE. We must defund police and ICE. And in a recent New York Times article about organizer Maxima Guerrero, we learned that Phoenix police are unsurprisingly targeting organizers and are placing them in ICE custody. So it does not matter if the sheriff is a Democrat or a Republican, they're still committed to policing and caging our community. The case of Guerrero reminds us that we have a long road ahead of us and that technology is also used as a policing mechanism. The current COVID-19 pandemic has shifted daily life and has forced many to shelter at home and to adopt the practice of social distancing, whether a city or a state ordinance. Although many are practicing these public health guidelines, these policies presume that the entire US population has access to housing with enough space to stay 6 feet apart and that everyone has running water in order to cleanse their hands. All these assumptions point to the fact that spaces like jails, prisons, and detention centers house a large number of people with chronic illness, and that makes it impossible to social distance. Back when the first
Cuando
stay-at-home
los primeros órdenes de quedarse en casa en Arizona, Pablos, junto con, ay, me refiero a Alejandra Pablos, Poder en Acción, Detention Watch, solo por nombrar algunos pocos, nos avisó acerca de
immigrant detention as well as prisons. Despite having public health concerns, individuals on the inside of prisons, jails, and detention centers are finding that their time locked up is a death sentence for many because they do not have adequate protections in place to keep themselves and others safe. We are seeing the effects of this clearly as prisons and detention centers are hotspots for COVID-19. According to the Prison Policy Institute, there are 2.3 million people in prisons and jails and detention centers in the US.
en los Estados Unidos y como Angela Davis nos enseña, no podemos utilizar el complejo de cárceles como una solución para arreglar problemas más grandes de la sociedad como problemas mentales.
That there's a financial interest in building more cages, which in turn highlights our over-reliance on criminalization and its active role in shaping our society. As we're dealing with the repercussions of a global pandemic with friends, family, and loved ones, there are sectors of our society that deal with this pandemic from inside cages and spaces of state violence. For example, ICE is still surveilling, is still conducting raids, and still kidnapping our community members. Although non-essential businesses have shut down, we must ask ourselves, is ICE and law enforcement really essential businesses? We owe it to ourselves and to our loved ones on the inside to commit ourselves to the abolitionist struggle today and for our future. And as a community of scholars and critical thinkers united here today, we must see these organizing efforts and join the struggle for liberation. Writer Arundhati Roy states, quote, "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, our dead ideas, our dead rivers, and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I ask you all here today to take these moments to think about what a world without criminalization and without caging looks like, and that we all fight every day to reach that vision. Thank you, and muchísimas gracias."
Thank you so much, Gloria. That was really great and illuminating about ICE and abolishing systems, and you really pushed through with technical difficulties, so thank you for sticking with us through that time. If anyone has questions, please submit them to the Q&A. The first question is, do you know of any organizations or groups organizing around abolition in Orange County?
Awesome. So yes, there are some folks that have begun to organize around abolition, particularly in Anaheim, in my hometown, which I'm super stoked and super excited about. It is a very small group. So I definitely want to encourage you to sort of look out for us in social media. But definitely I would advise you to follow Cop Watch Santana. That is an abolitionist group who's been around for a really long time monitoring law enforcement in Santana. There's also, of course, critical resistance in Los Angeles. And there are many, many groups that you can plug in, that you can plug into and actually be a part of. So I would definitely advise you to sort of start there, and then hopefully expand, and we'll have groups all over. But definitely try to follow those organizations on social media, and sort of start from there.
That's awesome. Thank you. Another question is, where might we find your writing on these subjects online?
That is a great question. So I'm actually working, I just finished a piece for the Abolition Journal, which is forthcoming, all about the role of femme aesthetics and art making. And so it will be out hopefully in a few months. And I'm still working through my writing. So hopefully within the next year or so, I'll be able to share some writing with folks. But in the meantime, I will send my any of my resources to the organizers, and send any videos and stuff like that to them.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. I believe that is all the questions that we have. So appreciate your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.